Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Two Old Sexperts. I'm one of your hosts, Shawn McGill, joined by the other host, Sharon Potter. Today, we're talking with you and having a very open discussion regarding how we can support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and autism spectrum disorders who may identify as gender diverse or diverse in their sexuality. What I like about doing this with you is that we just have a conversation. And I think that sometimes people just need to hear from hearts more than they do some of the literature and information that's out there, because people just really need to get to know other people and understand what it means in order to make a difference, but do the work too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I remember, I think I started a support group for LGBT young people 30 years ago in Harrisburg. It just grew and grew. And at one point, just from the conversations with the kids, I decided I would start another group for parents that we'd meet once a month. We invited PFLAG to come because parents thought they'd done something wrong, or their kid was going to get hurt or killed, or and real concerns. And that was just so wonderful to be able to look at both sides and help people understand each other. And then we also had a couple, I remember, kids with intellectual disabilities from group homes, and their staff brought them to the meeting. There's a lot of support systems around for people. We just have to step out and find them.
And if they don't exist in your area, you can create them. So
absolutely,
you have 2 or 3 people, you can form a group. But just looking back at what you started decades ago, we're talking decades.
I know, it's so weird.
We've had just sort of off the record conversations about how people have come back to you and said, your love and support saved their lives.
I know. I always feel so strange but so honored. But because I think it's the whole group. They would come to group, and there would be other like-minded people there, and it was unconditional support. But because I started it with Barry Loveland, and he was on the board, and he asked me to do it, and I did. But it is such and I always say it's the second best thing I ever did. My marrying Tom and blending our families was certainly pretty extraordinary. But those kids, and I recently went to a conference where they did one of the workshops on Common Roads, which is the name of the group. And it's so funny that I call them kids. 3 of the kids were there, and they're 50 and 48, and they're not kids, but when I knew them, they were. They are your age. Yeah. And it was so wonderful. It was just to get my hands on them and hug them, and know they're safe and happy. And it was absolutely wonderful. It really was. There are supports, and I've had people in agencies to say that we've got somebody here who says he's gay or she's gay, whatever, and they want to go meet other people like themselves. And I say, well, go do that. Then they go, well, what do I do? And I said, find a group. And this, you can probably find a gay running group, and a gay hiking group, and a gay, a million kinds of book clubs and whatever. Reach out and find it, and take the person there so they can meet other people. And that's one of the things I was thinking about with this particular program, that we're looking at educating people with intellectual disabilities about this array of terms, and I just call it like a rainbow of everything. And then the people that support them, we're doing the same thing in a little bit different way, but it's the same information. And those people that we're trying to educate, the direct support personnel, some of them, they're probably not quite as old as me, but they have beliefs that they were told in the 50s and 60s. And so they're dealing with that. Is this a right thing or wrong thing, or their religion and all of that stuff? And they're not getting enough support and training around this. They're really not. It's not changing, but it's improving a lot. And there's all the terms that come with that help people that are within the groups. But it really confuses people who are not.
Tell people you have to stick to what's legal and what's illegal. Like, we really have to shelve our morals and our values and our judgments, which they're different for all of us. But when we're supporting people with intellectual disabilities or autism, let's just stick to the facts. what we know. And what we
Yes.
know is what's legal, and what we know is what's illegal at this point.
I did have a friend call me. She's 86 and she has a granddaughter. And she said to me, I know what you do. And I think maybe you can help me. I'm really worried about my granddaughter because I think she's sick. And I said, why? And she said, well, she told me that she's pansexual. But she had no idea. She thought it was some disease or something that, she just didn't have any idea. And I said, oh, don't worry about that. She just, wants to keep all options are open to her. I said, and call me if you have any other questions. But people don't know. I mean, when I was a kid, there were no words. There were two horrible words for gay people. And other than that, there was no vocabulary that I knew of. And certain people who were dealing with those issues in their own bodies, there were no words for them either. They just felt like they were odd. I don't know what they felt because most of them, many stayed in the closet, many got married. And today it's so different. I mean, people are just, I am who I am. And all right.
And we met with Carol several months ago, who joined us for the show.
Yeah.
And talked openly about her life as a transgender
Yes.
woman who's older too. And I thought, my God, she's like really such a pioneer. And some, people like her are the people I look up to. But today we really wanted to focus on how we're supporting people with autism or intellectual disabilities when they're starting to question or struggle with some of these things.
There's just not enough support. There's absolutely not. And I mean, we could start support groups. I mean, I think each provider agency, actually, maybe of a certain size or whatever, should be required to have a support group. One of the things that we did when we were doing safer options was to have regional support groups for people who had offending or problematic behavior. And, they were people from different agencies, but you'd get 5 or 6 people in a group. And then one of us that was connected to safer options would facilitate. And that was pretty wonderful. I know but then it faded away, and things do. People retire or they move, and it's so hard to keep the ball rolling.
Well, I
It
had
really
an
is.
LGBTQIA. See, the acronym just keeps getting longer and longer, which is okay, but it's a lot to keep up with. But I ran one for many years, and I get calls or emails about if we still have it. During COVID, we had to suspend a lot of groups, and we tried online, and it fizzled down to maybe 1 or 2 people. And I said, if I get a commitment for 5 or more people, I'll create one again and do that. So I'm hoping to kind of get that information out there to people, because the people that we're supporting are not exempt from struggling with these issues. And what we know is that, at least in the trans community, 50% nearly are committing suicide. And the folks that we support are not exempt from that.
No, absolutely not. And sometimes the solution is, it's such a simple thing, and it gets so blown out of proportion. I mean, one young man who I think probably was transgender was stealing female underwear when they went out in the community, go to Target, whatever. And somehow the staff had escalated it to the point that they were thinking he might assault female staff, which I don't know how they made that connection. But anyway, I went in and met with them and met with this young man, and he just said he wanted female underwear, wanted to wear it. So I said to the staff, why don't you just buy him some? I mean, don't go to Victoria's Secret and get something, crazy that people might laugh at him if they see him, but get him like a, soft cotton and yellow or, pale blue or whatever. And they did. And he couldn't have been happier. And that was the end of that problem, but like they didn't even think about what it was he was asking for or why he was asking for it.
And backtrack to the problem. Problem is what we're putting out there, what we're saying about people. It just reminds me of Jim Crow or the AIDS era, where, if we're using that as an example, in the 80s, where and I remember this clearly, if you drink from a water fountain from and a person with HIV drank from it, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
That's why Black people couldn't swim in pools or
Yeah.
it's just the misinformation that gets twisted.
Insane. Yeah, there's a wonderful book. I don't know if you're familiar with Prayers for Bobby. It was written by a mother after the suicide of her gay son.
Oh, I just
She
got
was, yeah, she was fundamentalist religious woman, very religious woman, and she loved her son, and as was he. He was very active in the church in his 20s and did try to pray away the gay stuff, and it just didn't work. So he just took a swan dive off a bridge one day, and that was the end of Bobby. But the mother, in her grieving process, just I don't. There are no words for it. She just rose up, and she's become. Now, this is quite a while ago. She's probably close to my age, actually. But she wrote the book Prayers for Bobby, and she became an advocate for LGBT young people, well, people in general. I mean, how many people have died?
and that's just it, Sharon. We shouldn't have to lose another soul because we're uncomfortable with something or we don't understand something.
Yeah.
And we give people such a hard time over things. And I don't understand what you have between your legs or who you choose to love, how that translates into you being a hellacious person who's going to burn in eternal hell. I can't
Exactly.
wrap my head around that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's just so bizarre. And the direct care staff. Have you done any trainings around this issue for agencies around
Yes,
this specific issue?
yes.
Yeah.
I've met with the HICU a few times and done a few, and then private organizations. I do have several trainings that I've developed that are related to supporting the neurodiverse population and gender identity and sexuality, but also just understanding the differences between gender identity and sexual identity. I think that's something still that people struggle with.
Oh my
A lot of
goodness,
people
yes.
struggle with.
Well, I think I told you many, many years ago. It was was it in the 80s, early 80s? I had a dear friend who has since passed away, and he was just remarkable. He was a professor at a university, and he wasn't married. He was a single guy, and he became part of our family. He spent a lot of time with us, and at some point, he told me that he was a transgender woman who would never go through the transition. He was male, and he wouldn't go through the transition for many reasons. But he had two lives. He had an apartment in Philadelphia where he lived as a woman, and then he had his male self where he lived, were in the Scranton area actually. And one time he happened to say, if I ever did go through the transition, I would be a lesbian. And I was, what? I mean, I had no idea what he was talking about. So he just explained to me the difference in his gender and his gender identity and his sexual preference. I mean, and it never occurred to me. And, and it's so obvious now, but how do people know that? They don't know. You're going to transition, so you're going to become a male, then you'd want to be with the female. Well, no, probably not. But people don't know that. They just
Right.
don't know that.
Your gender identity is who you identify as
Right.
when it comes to gender, but your sexuality is related to who are you attracted to. So whether
Right.
that's, gay or lesbian or straight or bi or pan, which like you said means that you love everyone, you're more attracted to the personality and the spirit than you really are anything else.
Right. Yeah.
Which gets me confused because then I think, well, isn't that what bisexuality is?
Yeah, some of it is confusing, I think it is. I mean, it is for me. And the they, them, the pronouns, I really struggle with that. But I think it's my struggle. It's not that there's anything wrong with the pronouns, but when I think of they, them, it's plural. And I'm thinking about one person, but the person, that's exactly what they're saying. That's what they're saying.
That's what
I
they're
don't.
saying. But I tell the younger generation, please be patient with us because grammatically it doesn't make sense to us.
I know. I know. It's just it's a lot. And then when you add on top of that, the lack of education that people have had around these issues for people with intellectual disabilities. I mean, just around sex and sexuality, but then on the things that they might be feeling that they can't find the words for. And it's not that you want to sit down with someone and say, do you ever feel like you're male? Or, I'm not talking about that. But if you have a conversation with someone, a regular conversation, you can figure out what's going on with them, and and then support them, but educate people. I mean, just take the time and break it down and then support them, and then find the supports that they need beyond you or me or other folks that are trying to be supportive, because there's so many places that they can go. And I mean, one time there was somebody said they had a young man, that it was a young man, but it could have been a man or a woman, that said to the staff, "I'm gay, I want to meet other people." And the staff said to me, "Well, we don't want to go to a bar."
Neither do the
Well,
rest of us
then
usually.
don't go to a bar, but they, because they don't know, they don't know either.
One of the first places that I try to start. So if someone, I'm working with someone to try to figure it, quote unquote, out. I have a one-page worksheet, and it has a picture of an elephant. And I also have one that now is a unicorn. I ask a bunch of questions, and there's a scale. The scale breaks down gender identity and it breaks down sexuality. So, and I usually start with sexuality and talking about, well, who do you find yourself attracted to? When you find that you're attracted, like, where do you fall on this scale? And usually most of us are not 100% at one spectrum or the other.
That's right.
I am not attracted to men. I never have been, but I can find the beauty, the handsome, the attractiveness. I can appreciate that and I can see that. So I would not put myself at one far end of the spectrum. So we talk through those things. And then the same is true for gender identity. But I'm breaking down, okay, well, what is your brain telling you? How do you think? But what is your heart telling you? How do you feel?
Yeah.
And again, for most of us, we're not solely masculine or feminine. It opens up the dialogue, but I think the thing to stress to the listeners is the dialogue is going to be contingent upon your reactions. Because if we don't feel safe, we're not going to talk.
That's right. Exactly.
I stayed in prison for 4 decades because I didn't feel safe. And I probably came out at one of the worst times ever. I mean, look at what's splattered all over the news.
Boggles your mind, when you have family and friends who are all of these things, and then you hear people say things, like a man who says, like those gay men, I don't want them hitting on me. Well, oh, for God's sakes, what if a woman hit on you that you didn't like? What would you say? You'd maybe hopefully say, well, thanks for the compliment, but I'm in a relationship or whatever. Why wouldn't you say that if a man hit on you? And then my thought immediately goes to internalized homophobia, that the person that gets all in a tither, there's something in themselves that they're angry about, because they may be gay or have some, maybe bisexual or whatever. But I've seen that so many times. They're really angry people, and I just say, you doth protest too much.
Well, who was the person that started the conversion therapy? I forget the guy's name. There was a ban on that. Now I'm hearing that states are slowly bringing that back. But he was outed as gay a few years ago. And I thought, my God, what a face example of the hypocrisy and how people hide behind that for whatever the reason is. It's doing a lot of damage too.
Oh, God. I mean, when you think about 1 in 10, no matter what the population, whether it's, an ethnic population, a religious population, people with disabilities, whatever it might be, 1 in 10, that's a lot of people, a lot of people.
And as human beings, we all want safety, security, love, meaning. We want all of those foundational basic human needs in life. And so if we're not talking about these things and helping people learn the information, ask questions, what's happening, and we've talked so many times about this, they're going online and they're trying to pull up information, or they're worse yet, they're trying to meet people. I mean, I'm so afraid to talk to people online because I'm so jaded by what I've seen. People showing up, and there are all kinds of apps out there now too. If you're gay or you're transgender or you're anyone, you have a heartbeat, that you can hook up with people, and people are really getting taken advantage of, and they're getting hurt.
We've talked about this before, but people, with autism often get arrested for stalking or for child pornography, because they go online because they're kind of socially awkward and they have these relationships online, and they watch adult pornography, which is legal, but that's an easy hop over into the kids stuff. And when you actually talk to them, and which both of us have, I know, after they've been arrested, they'll say, well, I would never hurt a child. I would never touch a child. I was just watching it. When you watch it, the more people that watch it, the more kids have to be recruited, and then they get molested, and then you're contributing to that. And then they say, "Oh my God, I had no idea."
And
And
that's a problem that's growing with rapid intensity too.
absolutely.
See
Yeah.
billboards. When I was in Miami, there were billboards about human trafficking and where to call to get help. I've been in hotels, the last couple of weeks. I've been in hotels more than I've been home. There are soaps now that have information when you open this package of soap that talks about where you go or who you call if you're being trafficked.
Oh my God.
It's blowing my mind. Like, we've been aware of this kind of stuff for so long, but now we're here. It just tells you
Yeah.
how much money certain people are making off of this industry and exploiting whomever they can exploit to participate in it.
And there are a lot of role models now too. I mean, there's, a lot of characters in television and movies that are LGBTQ, endless things, which is good. But it's still, when it comes right down to the daily living, it's your daily experience is not usually one of support. And sometimes it is. It's not fair to say never, of course. I mean, I wonder, like, what do you do if someone, how would you, I mean, like some of the terms, well, there's gender nonconforming and gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. And if you're doing work, do you do classes for adults with intellectual disability, like groups?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do that also. So I try to kind of pull up and look at some of the terminology used, and we talk through the terminology. And quite honestly, Sharon, I don't even know what a lot of the terminology really means, and I'm transparent about it. Like, this is what I'm understanding it to mean, but until someone really can make me process it in a way that I'm going to understand it but and retain it, I just can't. So,
Yeah.
pansexual, we have intersex, we have they're using the term queer now. I mean, we just
Yeah.
have a gamut with things. But bottom line is trying to help support people to figure out who they are and to support them to get there safely and in a meaningful way. So
Yeah.
I'm not seeing as much around the gay or lesbian situation or bisexual when it comes to sexuality. I'm
Yeah.
seeing more with people coming to me about the transgender stuff. So, when I get referrals on sexuality, it's either the offender piece or consenting sexual interactions, which is gay, straight,
Exactly.
whatever. So we just address that. We do address that as we would any other person. I've done
Yeah.
sexual consent screenings on same-sex couples numerous times to just make sure that they understand things and they have an opportunity to ask questions too.
When I think of the terms like intersex, which you don't hear a lot about that, not as much, but a lot of people think it's the same as trans. They don't understand that they think that the person had both sets of, genitalia or what have you. And it's simple, I mean, no, that's not it. It's overwhelming, I think, for people that want to be supportive. They're afraid, but you've got to be brave. And when people depend on you and trust you, you've got to do the best you can and step up.
Well, and as I'm learning, you have to be brave because more often than not, people still love you and support you. But if
Yeah.
we're not feeling secure with those opportunities, we're just not going to have a chance to go there. So, and I get a lot of questions about, because I support the quote unquote neurotypical population who identifies transgender. And because we have a number of hoops that we have to go through in order to medically transition. If, not all trans people medically transition, but
Right.
strict guidelines that have to be followed if they elect to transition. And I've supported a number of people with autism or intellectual disabilities who wanted to make the medical transition. And that freaks teams out because they're so
Yeah.
afraid of making a mistake with that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that some of them are saying, well, how would they know? They have an intellectual disability. How do they know?
Mhm.
Well, they do. I
They
mean,
do.
it's so basic. It's not like how do they know, the equation for getting to the moon or something. It's so basic. It is, like they know, trust. they're saying that, then it's true. I mean, it's a little bit different. I mean, you can't compare that to the big concern about, except I don't have as much, I don't have a concern for this population either, but when people talk about kids transitioning too early, I have trans friends that say they knew when they were 4 years old. They just always knew. Can a child at 8 years old make a decision that they won't be able to have children? I mean, there are questions, but there are also answers. There are therapists. There's, time. Someone just doesn't say, I think I'm a boy. And then you say, oh, okay, you listen and you learn and you get support and there's a lot of support out there to be had.
And there isn't a one size fits all either, because again, I'm sort of on the fence over a number of issues because I've seen a lot. So
Yeah.
for the people that we support, I have suggested that we not support the person to medically transition. I went as far as to suggest that a family member fight for guardianship and actually received it, because what we do know is that people with autism are 8 times more likely to identify as gender diverse. But the problem, whenever you're looking at the standard, so there's the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, and that's sort of the Bible, the guideline for medical transition. People in institutional living, whether you're in jail or in a group home or anywhere, they are not exempt from any of these things either. So the same rules apply to them, no matter what.
Yeah.
But what I've seen is that the people that we support can often be very influenced by other people too.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to try to tease that out a little bit. And when you're talking about their histories and their past, most of us, we can go way back into the memory bank and say, oh my God, yeah, like this was here forever and it was so obvious. But it isn't the case for everyone. So trying to explore that a little bit. And I've had conversations with parents, with grandparents, just to kind of talk about, well, what were they like? What did you see? Because if you're going to medically transition, that's a big deal. With kids, especially with teenagers, what I've seen, and this is the neurotypical population, is one day they go with the flow with whatever sort of the buzz term is for the day, and then they could come back a few weeks or months or even a year later and say, yeah, I'm not this anymore. And I'm looking at people that I've supported over the years. I think some fatal mistakes could have been made if everyone just said, yeah, let's just push.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I do wonder how many people go through medical transitions and then say that was a mistake. I mean,
It happens. It's a very small number, but then
I would bet it is, but I would think it wouldn't happen if there were more questions and more therapy and more patience and just take your time. And it just seems like it would be a very small number of people, but that's what always gets thrown up. What if they change their mind? Well, we're not talking about like what kind of ice cream you like, that's kind of crazy.
So for
I
the
mean,
people we support, if they meet the criteria, the questions have been asked and all the boxes have been checked, it does not mean that we have to hold them to a higher standards of more hoops to jump through. And I think we do that with people with disabilities. They're held to a standard so much higher than the rest of us when it comes
Yeah.
to anything.
Well, that's true, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, do you know anyone that you worked with that actually in the system that transitioned?
I have 3 people that I've worked with personally. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't.
And and it's worked out beautifully. I have one where we've supported her to start the medical transition with hormones. The problem has been the provider has not been consistent in maintaining communication with the doctor and has been off and on hormones, and she's all over the place. So you have mental health things that have to be taken care of, but that's the other piece. When you start hormone replacement therapy, you absolutely are going to see shifts in mood. You're going to see shifts in hypersexuality or lack thereof. You're going to see these shifts that even out over time. But if you're monkeying with the medications and you're up and down with the dosage, or you're off or on, it's really going to screw you up.
Oh my God, that's horrible. That's almost worse than not doing anything. I mean, to really mess with somebody like that, that's so that person is in the process.
But has had insurmountable issues with mood and aggression. And I think the hormones contributed it, but I think the
Yeah.
inconsistency with the administration, because I saw her before she moved into a group home, she was fine. She did great for months when she lived at home and wasn't in the group. It was going to the group home, and then boom. I said, what happened? Like, someone help me understand what happened here. And I think there were a number of factors, improperly matching people and just throw them in because there's an extra bed, right down to she didn't get the testosterone blocker. She hadn't had it since she'd been there.
Oh my gosh.
So you have estrogen, surges of estrogen, but then surges of testosterone happening at the same time. That's sort of a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. And then, of course, somebody will say, well, see what happens with those
That's
people.
exactly it. And I'm going, la, la, la. I don't want to hear it, because
Yeah.
how do you explain she did great living in a stressful situation that was putting
Yeah.
her in a group home anyway, for months? Like, help me understand that.
Boy, there's a lot of work to do. There really is. I had a young man come to the group who was gay, and he was so funny because he would say, I like you. Do you want to go? I mean, he just like he had no boundaries, and he was absolutely adorable. But we talked about it. Everybody supported him, and it was fine. He learned as everybody else does, but he was starting much later to learn about how to have social relationships, and he had no idea because he'd never done it. He was like 19. You want to be my boyfriend and have sex? I think it was like his introductory statement to one of the guys.
But you see sort of the generational shifts too. So, thinking back to when you started the support group, that's when I was young. And I think, oh my God, like, I would have been in heaven to have someone like you to go to be able to talk about just, hey, I have this body, but I'm only attracted to women and not gay women. I like straight women. Like, well, that one, Sharon. But there wasn't talked about. Now you fast forward to I'm sort of at the top of the bell curve with my career and how it's going to kind of
Yeah.
out, hopefully in the next 10, 20 years, we'll see. But the big shift now is supporting the transgender community. I mean, hell, in the 90s, aside from like Ellen DeGeneres or Melissa Etheridge, and I don't know who else, no one was saying that they were gay or lesbian.
Right.
They just weren't
Yeah,
talking.
microphone moment with Ellen was she in an airport or I don't know something. But I remember that scene. They advertised it a lot. I'm gay, she said it. It's so interesting because it was like a big event. They kept talking about it. Tune in for Ellen and this thing. And then I think about one of my granddaughters that I was having breakfast with. She was home from college, and I said, "Is there anybody special in your life at the moment?" And she said, "Oh, yes, there is, Granny, and you will really like her." And I said, "I'm sure I will."
Oh,
And I did. But I mean, it was a non-issue in our family, but we're talking another, generation behind me, ahead of me. What is that? I don't know.
yeah, but we're also talking about a family who has been open-minded, a family
Yeah,
that's been raised to see people for who they are, not what they are. And
that's true.
that makes a big difference, whether
It
we're talking
does.
about, race or religion or whatever the discrimination can be against. We have due diligence to start with ourselves to impress the importance of see a person for who they are, no matter what.
I just thought of a funny thing. It's a little off track here, but I'll be short. One of my granddaughters, my daughter was trying to tell her daughter about racism, and the kids couldn't go to school together at one point, black kids and white kids. And she was maybe 6 or 7 at the time. She was trying to explain this to her. And my granddaughter said, "Oh, I think that's a good idea." Well, my daughter almost like fell off the chair, and she said, "No, well, tell me about it. Why?" And she said, "Well, there's a boy in my class, and he's so mean. I don't care. He doesn't have to be there. If he wasn't there, I'd be fine." And then, of course, my daughter said, "But are there other kids?" And she said, "Well, yeah, but they're nice. They could stay. But that one's mean. He could go. He could be part of that racism thing." But that was, she was a little girl, and
That's kind of how I'm feeling about the world, though. Mean people can just go. But, that's
yeah,
what I'm doing in my life, too. I'm getting rid of the mean people.
Well, that's a good thing to do. I have a couple. It's a very short list, but if someone is unkind and in general to the unkind to other people or to animals or to the planet, like I don't want to be with them or talk to them. I just don't. I really don't.
And
It's
the point of bringing this up is direct care staff, anyone, family members, be careful of what you say in front of your loved ones or the people that you support, because no matter what, they're always listening and they're always understanding. So
yeah,
if they hear you making a wisecrack or a mean statement towards anyone who's different, they're going to remember that. And
yeah,
it plays a role in how things sort of come out or don't come out. Um,
yeah,
so be mindful of that.
absolutely. I had when I was a full-time student at the University of Scranton, I was in my 30s, late bloomer. And I had this wonderful, I have a minor in philosophy, and this wonderful professor, he was a Jesuit actually. And I was the only woman in the class. They were 15 or 16 young men. And this professor, every once in a while, I think just to entertain the boys in the class, he would say something and he'd flick his little finger up and say, unless you know, like a gay kind of gesture.
Oh
And
God.
the second time that he did it, I up goes my hand and he says, yes, Mrs. Potter. And I said, there are, what, 17 young men in this class. Do you actually think that not one of them is gay? And every time you do this, you might as well stab them in the heart. And he said, how dare you? And I said, how dare you? And he said, class is dismissed. And it was dismissed. And I remember telling Tom about it that evening. And he said, well, you're probably done at the university. But the next class, he apologized to the whole class. He was quite a guy. He really was. And then we'd see him socially sometimes, and he'd call me over, and if he was talking to someone, and he'd say, "Let me tell you what you did to me in class." So he was kind of proud of it, and he should have been. He
And
really should
that's a
have been.
lesson in just humility too. So, be
Absolutely,
willing
yeah,
to receive feedback on, what you're doing, some of those biases that you put out there that I give people the benefit of the doubt. You may not even be aware that you are doing it, but once you're aware, don't do it again. Or at least
exactly.
be more mindful so that you're challenging yourself to not do it again. But you have to have humility to receive and do better.
Absolutely, yeah, no question about it. I wish we had so much more than we have around these issues. It's the bottom line. Groups, if we had one support group between two counties, like I'm up here in Wyoming County, Wyoming, Luzerne, whatever, and, bring people once a month or LGBTQI, whatever, and just talk. It doesn't have to be a serious thing. Just any questions, how you doing, what's happening, and
Well, and that's
continue.
why we're doing this. We want people to listen. We want people to get involved. We want people to reach out to us. And the folks that we support, they can handle it. I remember I came out to friends and family first, and then I had to come out to the people that I worked with, the people that we support. I was more scared to do that than I was anything else. And I'll never forget telling them and talking to them and explaining, I'm talking to you about this because you're going to see changes. I want you to ask questions. I want you to understand. I don't want you to be afraid. I don't, all this. And Sharon, I spent the hour where they asked questions, and 100% of them were supportive.
Oh, that is so awesome. That really is, and unfortunately probably pretty rare.
But that's why
Yeah,
I would much rather spend my time with people who have disabilities because of the
yeah.
purity of their hearts and the
Oh
will
my
to
goodness,
listen.
yes.
But we owe it to them to do the same thing for them too.
Yeah, we sure do. I had a friend who's passed away, and he was a man with a mild intellectual disability. He also had cerebral palsy, and he was placed in an institution at a young age and spent almost 20 years there. So a lot of it was just his lack of ability to read, and his speech was difficult. But I don't even know if he had an intellectual disability. But we got to be very, very dear friends. And he told me at one point that he abused people in the institution and nonverbal people, men, and he was gay. And I mean, I remember him telling me and crying about it, that he was so sad about that, but he didn't know what else to do. I just, how many people are I'm not suggesting that there's rampant abuse going on, but how do people don't know what to do? I mean, whether they're a gay couple or a straight couple, if someone finds them together doing something sexual, they have to report it. And then, and then it sometimes one person gets moved, and there's all this big stuff that goes on around it, when in fact, if you see two people interested in each other, support them. Whether it's a man and a woman, or a man and a man and a woman, whatever, support them and help them.
And that starts with conversations, institutional, what I call institutional sexuality happens too. So it happens in prisons, which you've worked in prisons, you see.
Yeah.
So, your sexual needs still have to be met on some level.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
having the conversation, and if it comes back where I want to have sexual interactions, that doesn't necessarily make someone one way or the other. But what is clearly communicating is we have to allow for some opportunity.
Right.
The more we're contacting people, the less opportunity they have.
Do you ever have people come to you and say, there's something, I don't know what it is. I don't know what I'm feeling or why. I mean, they really don't know. I mean, they might know if they're attracted to men or to women, but what if they're bi? What if they're attracted? I mean, do they ever say, what am I?
No. I would say most of the people, not all, but most, they've tapped into some sense of feeling painfully aware of the difference, or certain of the attraction one way or the other, or both. I think the biggest struggle, and we've seen male offenders who, just like we see priests, I mean, how do you explain it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where they acted out sexually against male children because it was easier than saying, yeah, this is who I am.
That's a whole other.
But there's a parallel, right? And
well, there is. Yeah, there is, because there's a little book called Kicking the Habit, which I may have mentioned before, but I find it fascinating. It was written by two women who were former nuns, and they're now life partners. The book it's not a new book, but it's quite interesting. And what they felt was that people who come, we're talking about Catholicism here, people who come from very religious families, the kids are, the whole family is very religious. And when the kids get to be in high school and they're not feeling attracted to guys or to girls, they're just not feeling it. So they think they've been chosen by God to be celibate and to go into these orders, into the seminary or the nun. I'm going to say the nunnery. Not, anyway, but then they get there, and then it hits them, and they're attracted to other people like themselves who are there for the same reason. And then to deny all of what they're feeling, they start to drink. So you have high numbers of alcoholic, gay, lesbian nuns and priests. And that's so sad. I mean, these are not bad people.
oh,
They're good people, good, decent people doing the best they can. But because of all the restrictions and that whole belief system, the book is really quite wonderful, because these women had to process so much. And were they denying God and their family? No, not at all. And they kept all their beliefs, and and stayed connected to their families. But it was pretty painful for them to come to those terms.
And a part of the problem, we've alluded to this, is the shame that we try to get people to wear. Being in the DC area, my family's down here, so I got to have dinner with my uncle last night. And I adored my grandparents, especially my grandmother was just very close to her. But he was saying, as the children of the chief of police, there was just this push where she had to be the perfect wife, you had to be the perfect husband, they had to be the perfect children, and everything just had to look perfect. And he said, that really screwed me up, Shawn. He said, I just walked around feeling like I had to be perfect. So knowing that I'm not perfect, because no one is, it made me wear so much shame. So he said, I went to this meditation retreat or some holistic retreat. And he said, I just remember this person prompting me to stand up and say, fuck what the neighbors think. And he said, I wasn't okay until I was screaming, fuck what the neighbors think.
Well, good for him.
But we have to get people to stop wearing the cloak of shame, but we have to stop trying to put that shame upon them too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that was what, my husband was African American, my second husband. And, and it wasn't exactly the same, but some people would actually say, "You're married to a black man?" Like, I'm married to a marvelous human being. What are you trying to say to me here? But I would, jump back at them a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that was, oh dear, you poor thing.
You poor thing for having such a wonderful husband and
I
family.
know.
I'm
I
so
want to say
sorry.
you have no idea, honey. He was pretty marvelous.
But and I think this is important stuff for us to talk about, because being on the side of someone who is different too. Before I got on to talk to you, I was talking to a friend of mine, and just going through, well, why would anyone want to date me? And she's like, Shawn, you need to have more self-confidence. And she's like, where is this really coming from? And I said, you know what? Where it's coming from is just the shame that's put on people for being different. And she said, look, all I got to tell you is you're not bad looking. You got a heck of a career, and you're more put together than probably 90% of the dumb men running out there. So you got this. And
I
I
know. Well, if I wasn't 80 and could be your mother and I was single, I would date you.
but Sharon, here I am teaching,
Yeah.
walking people through this. And I'm probably always going to carry like this sense of doubt, because that's what existed. There wasn't a trans person in sight until maybe 10 years ago that was
Yeah,
out there talking about it. But
exactly.
the goal is to help the younger generation, the generation behind me, not have to carry so much. And that's what you did for that group, who I think primarily gay and lesbian or bisexual, but that's what you did for that group too.
Yeah. And boy, what they did for me, really, they were quite something. I just get so thrilled that, around Mother's Day or holidays or, I still, or, just once in a while get an email. Means a lot. It really does.
You can be remembered in this afterlife for loving people, right? Or you can be remembered for the dreadful experiences and feelings that you impressed upon them too. And, Maya Angelou had that famous quote, and I think about that all the time. How are you going to be remembered today? I saw an older couple. They had to be in their mid-90s. He was struggling to help her up over the curb. And I just simply asked, are you okay? Do you need help? And she said, yes. She said, this damn curb. And I lifted her up and put her on the
Yeah.
sidewalk.
Yeah. Yeah. I do that all the time. If I see someone, and it's not even that they're older than me at age, it doesn't have to do at all with age. But if I see somebody struggling with getting their bags into their car at the supermarket, you just help them, or they're finished with their car, you take it and put it wherever it goes. I mean, that's what you do. I mean, I don't understand why people don't.
So the message of today is quit being afraid, quit placing shame. And you know what? Get to know people who are different than you, because your
Yep,
whole life could open up. The lives for the people that we're supporting won't change. We'll still be having this conversation in 10 years
we
if
will.
we don't do this sort of thing that is going to promote the safety and the awareness and the opportunity for change for the people that we
Exactly.
support. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Two Old Sexperts. Please stay tuned for our next episode coming soon.